government, a center-right government for the long term, that's probably what we're going to get. So one easy way to measure this, and this may not apply directly towards your lobbying, is which communities and constituencies of voters are you engaging? Are you engaging? So, for example, in Texas, when Beto O'Rourke and Ted Cruz ran, we saw a huge turnout amongst traditional voters, some upticks of young voters, some upticks of Latino voters. But overall, the preponderance of people in Texas did not participate at all in this election. And so, in what way are we trying to expand the base, expand the electorate, and specifically expand it into communities that fit the profiles of justice communities? So, working class people, poor folks, people who lack access to quality education, quality health care. It's critical for our movement that we are opening doors, building bridges, extending hands to connect with those communities like we're trying to do tonight, ask questions, listen, as much as we are doing that to conservatives who just don't know much about actual energy policy or carbon policy, or other folks that are affected. Just because you're most impacted or a frontline person doesn't mean you're automatically Democrat or progressive. Lots of rural agriculture communities and farmers in Texas are very much affected by climate policy, but we don't always think of them or their work or the workers that are employed in those industries as frontline. So again, to recap, I understand the approach. It definitely is limiting, but if you're investing even just a fraction of your energy into expanding that base, you'll be very grateful in the long run because it'll help set you up to move those more aggressive goals more quickly.
Okay. The second question, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act provides two key climate and environmental justice provisions, in my opinion. One, the dividend is in its effect highly progressive. Two, the carbon fee would accelerate the shutdown of coal plants and mines, as well as some other dirty fuels, which especially hurt health in frontline communities. Do you feel this is enough for progressives to support this bill?
On a policy lens, yeah, absolutely. Now, politically, it all depends. We just witnessed a whole cadre of progressive support funding for building a border wall again in my ancestral homeland here in Texas. These are strong progressives. That people are willing to do what's expedient. And right now, because of the crisis that we're facing, I think people would be willing to support this. I'm sure you're hearing that. And when people push back, I'd be really interested in hearing more about the dance between maintaining your moderates and your conservative supporters, maintaining that support when you're being pulled by the progressive wings. Now, I was reading a little bit about the bill. I think the provisions that keep it progressive are critically important. How much is a price affecting different classes of folks? We in Austin, this is something that we struggle with a lot. There's a culture here of people who very much want to just. They think that we need to be willing to pay more for clean energy because it's the right thing to do for the planet. Yet they're not extremely willing to pay even more or support a truly progressive plan that would make that energy extremely affordable, if not free, for poor folks who've been in Austin and who are facing gentrification and displacement. So as long as those pieces are in place, I think you stand a good chance. I would also, I'll get to this in a minute, Bob, about the pollution impact, methane, petrochemical industries and things like that. So let's go forward.
Okay. What are the top climate justice and environmental justice problems that you think national climate legislation should address?
So these two things don't always go hand in hand. If you all been following any news right now, you're hearing about major petrochemical fires in Houston. You know, fuel tank farms, chemical storage tank farms is burning. They're going to burn out. This is all too common in Texas, and you can pretty much assume what types of communities are placed around these heavy petrochemical industrial zones. So when it comes to environmental justice, it's things like that, that if you're big enough and you have enough money as a major industry in this country, you're going to find ways to exempt yourself from rules. Governor Abbott in our state has continued a emergency declaration from when Hurricane Harvey hit more than a year ago. Okay, it's been a long time. They just re-upped that disaster declaration recently, which exempts a lot of these facilities from air monitoring rules and regulations, from reporting on those things, from safety checks. And, there's a real consequence to that, meaning, short term in terms of people not being able to breathe or live comfortable lives. They're being told to stay inside because the air is so bad outside during ozone season, not just during chemical fires. So we need chemical safety overhauls in federal policy, the Chemical Safety Acts. And it's important that this organization and y'all and your other organizations that you're part of, you try to find ways to support policy that's not directly what you're focused on right now. Talk to the Climate Justice Alliance folks, talk to folks on the ground in communities, see what they're working on. You carry a lot of power. You are able to step out of your CCL hat or your Sierra Club hat or whatever it is, and serve as a person of privilege advocating for a policy that maybe a legislator is only hearing about from the same old types of justice organizations. Beyond that, similarly, we have emergency response, natural disaster response needs. There's been plenty of news about Hurricane Harvey and who's been helped and who has been left behind. Again, folks with money, folks with insurance, folks who live in better, safer communities, folks who tend to have lighter skin, tend to be doing just, better than folks who were living in the 3rd Ward or the 5th Ward of Houston, who didn't have any of that stuff. And, the way that FEMA doles out response money, disaster money, is completely crooked and broken. We hear story and story and story of the ways that federal policy that hasn't changed since Katrina keeps people from getting a check when their home is destroyed and they're forced to either live in that house. We've seen people living in homes with black mold since the storm hit currently. Churches and nonprofit agencies and organizations can only do so much. But the fact is that many communities that are vulnerable to air pollution and climate change are going to be harmed, and we aren't prepared to truly help these folks or get resources in their hands and invest in them in the long term, mostly because we haven't done that in the first place, and it's unlikely we're going to do that after a storm like this or like the fires that we're seeing. Other issues that are important is you may have read about energy democracy. Anything that can move folks toward more participation in their energy systems, how they make decisions about where their energy comes from, what programs they're part of, knowledge about where the light comes from, where the water comes from, and what goes into it is healthy. It's not just healthy for a climate perspective, it's healthy for a civic participation and citizen engagement. If we're going to build a long-term strategy for building a base of people that can truly advance a progressive cause, we need people to understand what they're participating in. And so, this might jump, Bob, to your next question a little bit, but similar to how we saw with the Affordable Care Act, there was a heavy investment in community education, community enrollment, in talking to folks about health issues, about the programs, clinics and fairs to bring people out. I'm not saying people are extremely well versed in the ACA, but having programs like that can really go a long way. Focusing on the implementation, not just sending people checks and hoping for the best, but really trying to set aside money so folks can understand what this is. Bob, I'll stop there if you want to jump to your next one.
So from what I hear, the next question was CCL progressives would support many justice provisions in future bills. And I've even heard some staff at CCL say that they're willing to do that. From what I'm hearing you is you don't think we have to get those provisions in this bill as long as we keep working towards them. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've seen it time and time again, at least in state legislation and city legislation, that if you're able to lay out your blueprint for a stronger platform, a stronger policy agenda, and how this is one step in that, it's an opportunity to get buy-in from those progressives. It's an opportunity to challenge any of your progressive allies who may be hesitant to really help lift that issue up and help you work towards making it stronger going forward. I don't know many policymakers that are proponents of the perfect is better than the good, always. Like, that's not how policies is made. I do think it's important here that part of that strategy focus on non-carbon pollution. So when I talked about all these industries earlier, we're not talking about carbon, we're talking about toxics, petrochemical industries. We're talking industries that are connected to the frac cycle and the plastic cycle through the natural gas that they use to produce their plastics products, and are a main driver for a lot of the fracking we're seeing in West Texas, for example, in the Permian Basin. I think it's important that folks see that how are you going to talk about these issues? How are you going to talk about methane, the exports of fracked gas and fracked oil? You don't have to have all the answers. I don't expect any of you all to really do that, or anybody I work with, but you need to be able to communicate what your thinking is, when you expect to have those conversations and with whom, what questions might be good to ask. And don't be, I don't know how many of y'all are actually out there shopping this to community organizations and justice folks, but if you are, I'm sure you've had some pushback, and don't be disillusioned by that. That's okay. That's how this goes. It's on them and us as well to find a way forward. Check.
Now, you have mentioned to me before the need to deal with the workers displaced by, say, the coal union jobs and other natural gas jobs. Do you want to make a comment about that?
Yeah. Sorry for the it's bedtime. Sorry for the background noise. And props to my partner for helping me right now so I could be on this call. It's so easy to forget about industry employees. A lot of times we think of worker transition is one sector going to another sector, one sector worker going to another. You know, coal workers going to learn how to install solar panels, things like that. And that's the exception. You know, it's not the rule. It's not the norm. Typically, these communities that we're talking about are so far removed from, you know, our 21st century economies that it would be very hard for them to find work, period. And they tend to move into other trades work that involves lots of travel, time away from their families, or like what we're seeing in Texas. They just basically start, you know, working along the around the fracking and oil rigs and everything that goes with that. Electricians, plumbers, drivers, truck drivers, you name it. Now, this is where, you know, portions of the Green New Deal become really interesting. How we look at communities holistically for what they are, for what they offer, their own unique people and cultures, is critically important. What exists out in those communities? What sorts of folks? What sorts of training? They may not. Their future economies may not have anything to do with energy. You know, in the coal belts in East Texas, turns out there's a lot of manufacturing for component parts for air conditioners and HVAC units. You know, we have to look at what economies and what companies exist and find ways to grow and support those. And that's going to be a regional approach, multi-county, multi-state, local, and federal elected officials. But we need investment to really drive it. We need to make money available, which is what has worked in some of the eastern U.S. communities, specifically in some in West Virginia, when we had stimulus money made available to put resources into all different types of projects, both green projects and just other projects. If we're not investing and creating funds at the federal level, it's very hard for local communities to come up with this funding. You know, there's also a lot of potential with folks being able to work in the major metro areas relatively close to their communities. Now, in Texas, that might be a 3-4 hour drive, if not more. But, you know, an hour drive for folks to be able to go work on infrastructure projects in a metro area, whether it's transmission upgrades, water infrastructure, roads, other transportation infrastructure, repairing and replacing all of that is going to put a lot of people to work. I think that's a real core piece of what a just transition looks like.
Okay, well, I'd like to open it up for other people to ask questions. Just unmute yourself. And if you have any questions for Dave. Since I don't hear any yet, what do you think about the Green New Deal, Dave?
I think a lot of my Green Party friends are really upset about it because they had been talking about it for a long time. And I think it inherently lacks a critique of global capitalism. I think it's being sold and packaged as a progressive policy. But that being said, it's still worth moving forward and exploring which pieces of it can be adopted locally, which pieces can be moving federally. And I'm excited that folks are having the conversation. I was actually amazed to see how quickly the right wing just latched onto it and tagged anything environmental to be that. We're seeing local chambers of commerce around Houston have whole keynotes and luncheons about the Green New Deal, socialism, and all these big scary things. And wow, really, it shook them. And what I'm not as excited about is how much infrastructure we have in our movement to actually get out and talk about those issues, not just hold signs and say we demand this thing, but actually get out and talk to people about what this means, going in and organizing in different shops, in different businesses, in different churches and things like that. We need the type of infrastructure the right wing used in the 1980s to get into churches and build a fear-based movement that really rose to tremendous power in the last 20 years. We're a long way from that.
This is Jim Ryan in Detroit.
I have a question about, it seems like in the past 3 months, the public's awareness of climate change as a solvable problem and a necessary problem has grown a whole lot. Does everybody see that, or is that just me?
I see that. I agree with that. What do others think?
Well, I hope we can take advantage of that.
What would be one suggestion? What's one idea you have to take advantage of that?
I'm a CCLer. I see the virtues of a method to raise the price of fossil fuel in a way that the public does not feel hurt.
This is Jim Ryan in Detroit. I'd like to make a comment that in a tweet by Representative Cortez, she said that the Green New Deal was kind of like a call for proposals, which essentially sets up goals and calls for solutions, which I think the bill which we submitted is one of those. But the question that I wanted to ask was, the EJ groups that I work with in the Detroit area, you either get the one gentleman mentioned in a talk that he equated carbon taxes with geoengineering, and another lady that I spoke with just didn't like market solutions. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I definitely none about geoengineering. I'm gonna skip that one. But on the market-based solutions, I think it's valid. I think many folks don't have faith in that, and I haven't been able to read all these comments that are coming in the chat, but I did see one that commented about this being a shovel-ready project. I think that's on point. This is something that we can do right now. Why wouldn't we do that? What is it that we wanted? Are we going to abolish capitalism tomorrow? Is that what we're asking for? Most justice organizations aren't going to die on that sword. But the best advice I can have, and Jim, I don't know how long you've had relationships with these folks. You may have known them for a long time, but it's important to have space to continue and revisit these conversations over and over, where you all are, talking about an article that you read that digs into this and develops a rapport and an IQ about the issue from folks, so it's not so easy to just dismiss. Sometimes having some listening sessions with folks where they're free to come up to the microphone and raise these concerns, but part of it is an agreement to have 2 or 3 follow-up meetings so we could actually come up with some recommendations for what this policy should be. It's very easy for folks, and I've seen it happen too much, where folks will just criticize and walk away. And I'm sure some of you have encountered that, and would encourage you to not be too discouraged by that if it's happening.
Dave, this is Alan Matlich in San Mateo County, California. I was looking at the people who are co-sponsors of the Green New Deal resolution, and people who are co-sponsors of the Energy Innovation Act. And what I was seeing was the Green New Deal is primarily, or is mainly supported by people in the progressive caucus. Now, there's a lot of new Democrats who are on board with that, but not quite so many, certainly as the progressive caucus. I think the Republicans have been trying to use the Green New Deal to drive a wedge between Democrats. When you look at the Energy Innovation Act, however, you see a number of progressives and New Democrats signing on to that, although of course it's very, very much fewer. I'm wondering whether people on the left, or the people that you are speaking with, are concerned about the division that might arise as a result of the Green New Deal, or whether it's simply a let's get the momentum going and sort of drag the country in that direction.
There's a lot of concern about how much this is, being used as sort of a dog whistle to the right and to the fossil fuel industry to rally them. I find that though healthy, and the proverbial kick in the rear that we need to get our act together to be better situated to organize and advocate for these things. Now, again, I forgot to mention this earlier, but if I think you all are familiar with the Jemez principles for democratic organizing. Always reflect back on those as some sort of guide rails for how you structure your outreach and organizing. When we're talking about these things, it's important that we are talking to people and not just our elected officials and people who we're trying to lobby. When the right is saying these things and blasting it on Fox News and sending it out in their advocacy association emails, they're reaching a lot more people. They have a lot more resources, and their audience is massive. And we just don't have that kind of reach unless we are equally investing in reaching out to everyday people through our, church sermons, through our, after school programs, farmers markets, all those things that you do with your normal outreach at. So that's so important. I can't emphasize that enough. It's bedtime? Okay. I can take one more, and then I need to go.
I have a question. If I could go back to working with communities, we in Fayetteville have been working with the Delta, people in the Delta, and we've been creating quite and I feel a beginning of a very good coalition. The first question I have is, you talked about working with these frontline communities about pushback. What did you mean by pushback, and what sort of response is possible?
Pushback in the sense of the carbon fee and dividend?
Well, I'm not sure what you meant by it. I mean, pushback from the communities about not being interested in carbon fee and dividend. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. Well, generally, I mean, I think some of you on the call have experienced that folks approach this, when they hear this, they think cap and trade. Okay. And there's a tremendous amount of heartburn. And so there's conversations that need to happen to get over that hump.
Okay. My other question had to do with, since we are starting to plan a program, a listening program, one of the people that I talked with said that she was just now beginning to understand, she's African American, but she's just now beginning to understand the connection between racial equity and climate change. So I was saying, well, I did a PowerPoint of the book Energy Democracy, but I didn't want to present it myself. I wanted to do it with her to the community. And I'm wondering if you consider that like a good way to begin working with these communities, is helping to make that connection clear.
I think that's, yeah, I don't think there's any harm there. One of your biggest assets here is the dividend, in the fact that folks are going to be getting money in their pockets. There's no better tool for our work and our movement than being able to help people put food on the table or keep clothes on their kids' backs or a roof over their heads. The more you talk about that, this is money in your pocket potentially.
Right.
You're going to get everybody listening. I promise.
Right.
And we I think there was one more comment on the chat. I don't see I definitely think these are not mutually exclusive policies, carbon fee and dividend and the Green New Deal. It's just important. I mean, the Green New Deal is sexy. It sounds great. And the new, socialist congresswoman is advocating for it, and there's a lot of attention around it. I don't know that a lot of people believe in a unity approach and bipartisanship in the way that Congressman O'Rourke is putting it out there, but it's his energy and his charisma and his excitement that he brings to it, his culture that he brings that really excites people. We need to find a way to make this more palatable. Listening to you all today, it's making me I'm going to learn more about my organization's national policy on this issue. I'm curious why we're not more involved with the Sierra Club. If any of you all are Sierra Club members and you have that information, please share it with me. I bet it's most likely we just don't want to rock any boats with our climate justice friends and folks like that.